Hello, I'm Roger Bisbee from the Skill Builder channel. I'm back in London doing another walkabout. Going to talk about some buildings, and I got my grandson with me on the camera. So where I am now is outside the Albert Memorial in Kensington Gardens, and this very lavish memorial. I mean, there aren't many princes who get a memorial like this, but I think Queen Victoria was rather fond of him, and he died prematurely and she never recovered from it. She dressed in black from the day he died till the day she died. She was in constant mourning for all those years, her beloved Albert. Now, Albert was an interesting character in his own right. He was very, very keen on gadgets and technology and all that kind of thing. And don't forget, in the Victorian age, there were a lot of exciting things being invented, things happening. The world was changing very rapidly, as it still is. There was a man called Thomas Cubitt, who I'm going to talk about in another video, who was a great builder, and he suggested that they have this great exhibition. Now, nobody had ever had a great exhibition like this before. It was the first one in the world, and they built the most fantastic crystal palace to house the great exhibition. It was a monster structure of steel and glass like nobody had ever seen before. Albert was very, very involved in the whole thing, in the administration and so on. They housed it with exhibitors from all over the world, and it was meant to showcase technology. It was meant to showcase the finest inventions, and it was tremendously popular. He worked very hard to make the thing a success, and they reckon that 1 in every 6 people in Britain or the equivalent came to this exhibition. It was the biggest, most extravagant thing they'd ever seen, and it made a great profit, roughly equivalent to £20 million today. And Albert said, what we need to do with this money is we need to buy the land just to the south of here, and we need to put some permanent exhibitions there. So that's why we now have, down the road from here, the Exhibition Road, clues in the name, we have the Science Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the Victorian Albert Museum, and a number of other institutions like the Imperial College and so on. But across the road, there is also the Albert Hall. Sadly, Albert didn't live to see it built. Queen Victoria had to lay the first foundation stone of it as a widow, but it was there as a memorial to him, as this is as well. So he's done well, hasn't he? He's well represented. He's got the memorial here, he's got the Albert Hall across the road, and all that area down there, the Exhibition Road and Victoria and Albert Museum, is all known as Albertopolis. You won't hear that word very often because it didn't really catch on, but back in Victorian days it was known as Albertopolis. You can understand why it didn't catch on. It's difficult to say. Now, on the 4 corners of this monument are these statues, and they really reflect the international nature of the great exhibition, because on the far corner we've got Europe, and here we've got America, and as we move down the line, Africa. There you are. So maybe the next one down will be Asia. Sorry, Australia, you're not in it. You think about it, Australia back in those days was where they sent the criminals. Anyway, Albert, when he died, it was a massive thing in Victorian England. The whole country went into mourning, and they liken it to the death of Princess Di, if you can remember what that was like. You know, people lined the streets for the funeral. It was a very sombre time, and he played sombre music, and it went on for ages. As I say, the Queen Victoria carried on mourning for the rest of her life. So here we are, Asia. I love the way they put these women on everyone. Indian princess, Arabs on the side. A lot of fun, really, aren't they? Won't let you get any closer than that. There's fence all around it, and I've got a feeling they don't want people clambering all over it. And of course, when they built the Albert Memorial on the site of the Crystal Palace, they moved the Crystal Palace, and they moved that to Annerley, just down in South London, and they built it there, and it was supposed to be a great attraction, except for the fact that the transport links aren't particularly great to that part of London, and it wasn't a huge success, and mysteriously it burnt down. Now, you may wonder what there is to burn in a structure that's made of glass and steel, but anyway, it caused a huge fire, and that burnt down, and they never rebuilt it, and all that's left there now is a park, also a few plastic dinosaurs. So I wouldn't rush down there if I were you. Another feature of the great exhibition was that it was a site of the first public flushing lavatories, and these were the idea of George Jennings, who was a plumber. He said that he would install these if he could charge people a penny for using them, and that became the origin of the spend a penny that entered our language. And not only did you get to use a nice loo, you got a clean seat, you got a loo to use, but you also got a comb, a towel, and a shoe shine for your pennies. So that was value for money. Anyway, George Jennings, a great guy. He went on to establish a very successful plumbing business in Blackfriars, and he built several of the beautiful London Underground lavatories around, which had this kind of a raw time around the top, and you descended down into the depths, down some steps. And at one time they were great places, and then they sort of fell into disrepair and disuse and became a bit notorious, people hanging about, you know. So they were closed, and it's a great shame, because I remember using them as a kid, and they all had an attendant, and they were good places. Now, one thing that my life in the building industry has taught me is that not everything goes to plan. And here at the Albert Hall, they had what you might call a few teething problems. It was a round building built in the lines of the amphitheatre and similar Roman structures. You know, the world over, we know that round buildings are good for acoustics. Several examples of that around the world. But what happened here is that they put a roof on it, and all those amphitheatres in Rome, of course, didn't have roofs. So what happened is that the glass and steel roof that they put on was a nightmare as far as the acoustics went, because when they played concerts here, the music would hit the roof, reverberate, and round about 6 seconds later, it would come back down to the conductor. So they say it was the only concert hall in the world where the conductor could hear his works twice. So they worked for years to try and solve the echo, the reverberation that they were getting off that glass. And they did it by hanging a great tent from the underside of the roof, a big canvas tent that would absorb the sound. But of course, it kind of worked in a way, but it also got very dusty very quickly, filled up with dust and dirt, and it just wasn't the practical solution they were looking for. So they carried on experimenting with different ideas, and sometime in the 1960s, they came up with this idea of hanging mushrooms that would bounce the sound down and basically break the sound up, I suppose, in some way. Now, at the bottom of Exhibition Road, just where it joins Cromwell Road, is the Natural History Museum, and I think one of the finest buildings in London. I've always loved this building, which may tell you something about my tastes. A fella called Hans Sloane had a private collection of fossils and specimens and all kinds of things related to natural history, and he decided to give that or sell that to the nation, and Parliament voted to buy that entire collection for £20,000, which was well below its value. It formed the basis of what we now have here, and it was housed in the British Museum. It was part of a British museum, and it wasn't till a lot later that it was given its own dedicated exhibition centre, and of course added to. And interestingly, those original specimens from Hans Sloane, most of them don't exist now. They've been lost, they've been damaged, all kinds of things have happened. They weren't actually very good at looking after that collection for quite a long time. They're a lot better now, but at one time they were carrying a tray of specimens across a courtyard, and the wind blew and it blew them all away. So just goes to show, but they're a bit more rigorous now. But what I really want to talk about is this building, because although it looks so beautiful and you think it's a really lavish building, it's actually terracotta tiles on the front of a steel frame building. And you'll see inside, when we go inside in a minute, that it's basically very similar to something like St Pancras railway station. You've got this lovely facade, which is made out of terracotta, which all came from the potteries, and they've just kind of stuck that on the front of a steel frame building. And you'll see that the reason they had to build such a big arch building, they weren't going to put trains inside it, they were going to put a dinosaur inside it and a blue whale and all kinds of other really large exhibits. So it lends itself very nicely to its purpose, but it is interesting that you look at this and you think this is absolutely beautiful stonework, and then you find out that it's just cladding. So you can see the guys behind are doing a bit of restoration work on it. There's always something to do on these buildings. I think actually what they're doing is working on the window windows and maybe the pointing around the windows rather than the terracotta panels, because the great thing about these terracotta panels is that they're very, very resilient to pollution. So they're an ideal material to use in somewhere like this city environment where you've got traffic fumes, and of course before that you had coal fires. So this is the grand entrance, and you can see all around the edges they've got all these carvings of little animals, and in both the west and the east wing they've also got little animals all around it, and every one of those was drawn and then it was sculpted by a French sculptor, and then it was taken up to the potteries so that they could replicate them in terracotta. So interestingly, on one side they've got the extinct animals, and on the other side they've got the ones that are still living, although they've made a couple of mistakes on that and put some of the extinct ones in the living ones. The reason that they did that they separated them out, is really in deference to the creationists. Back in the Victorian age, a lot of people were very sceptical about Darwin's theory of evolution. They considered it to be heresy, and they were clinging very much to the idea that the world was made in 6 days and on the 7th day God rested. They had to separate out those two bits so that there wasn't a link between the fossils and the modern things. We didn't want any link between the apes and the man, if you like. So you see the basic structure of this building, still framed, and it's really like a railway station, isn't it? They've got those steel arches going there, they've got steel posts coming down onto that stonework, but inside that stonework is only terracotta tiles, and inside that is a steel frame. Even the end there, with the steps going up, is similar to Grand Central Station, isn't it, where it just rises up both ends. You can see everywhere, all over here, all these tiles, animals, birds on them, the birds on all these ones, and then as we go around here, we've got Ram's Head. You can see that all this is tiled. There are hundreds and hundreds of these little animals everywhere, and then they made a mould, and then they cast the terracotta tiles from it. Oh yeah, look, this is what you've got in the Darwin Centre, the evolution of cakes and pastries. Fantastic building though. This was Prince Albert saying the Great Exhibition was such a success that we need to get something permanent to educate and inform. Remember that there was no television, no film, no. People either got their information from books or from exhibitions. So all these look to me to be very current. Get one of those down my fish and chip shop. Your place or mine. He's pretty good, isn't he? Charles Darwin now got pride of place, having been a controversial figure in Victorian times, and he actually suppressed his publication of The Origin of a Species for quite a while because he was worried about the backlash from the church. There's still a lot of people out there who don't believe it. They call it the theory of evolution for a reason. Nothing's proven. But then again, nothing's proven about God either. Now we're up here, you get a better idea of the structure. It's built incredibly quickly. It didn't hang about in Victorian days. They wanted to get this lot up and running. Considering it's all free, even now, you can make a donation, but they don't actually charge you for getting in. Could spend the whole day in this room because I'm quite fascinated by minerals. Part of me wishes I'd become a geologist, actually, rather than a plumber. So what I want to show you here at the side of the Victorian Albert Museum is these big chunks taken out of the stonework. All these chunks missing out of the walls are the result of shrapnel from bombs dropped during the Blitz. So there's people who think that it was restricted to one area of London. We're totally wrong, because there was actually a bit of Buckingham Palace which was hit. So there you are. Massive bit of damage done, but they were just basically terrorising the nation. It's worth bearing in mind that the person who brought all this into being was German. So on one hand we've got one German who is looking to leave somewhere to posterity and enrich people's lives, and on the other hand we've got a German who's hell-bent on destroying it all. And it's not hard to guess which one is going to be remembered in history.